Hey, Cycle Breakers. So, today we are talking about holistic mental health. So, have you ever set a goal for yourself that really looks good on paper, but it felt almost impossible to actually sustain that in real life? And so oftentimes that does happen with our goals. And sometimes it can feel like a human failing when we do that, even though there's a part of us that's aware life is lifing, things are shifting and pivoting, right? And so, what I want to talk to you about today is the power of holistic mental health. And could this be the missing link to your ability to sustainably pursue and accomplish your goals? It certainly was for me, and so it might be for you too. Let's jump into that, all right? And as you know, I'm Kim Small, licensed clinical social worker, founder of Healing Insight Therapy and Wellness Collective, and specifically our Cycle Breaker to Cycle Maker community. And something I find is that this holistic approach to wellness is especially important for those of us who identify with this identity of cycle breaker or even cycle maker. And so that is what we are talking about today. We are going to talk about what mental health is, how it's different from traditional approaches to mental health and wellness. We'll also talk about why it is particularly important for cycle breakers to kind of embody this holistic approach and provide some examples on what that looks like. And then we won't stop there. I'm not going to just leave you hanging. I'm going to give you some guidance on how to create your very own holistic mental health action plan. And by the way, we actually have a free template that will support you with creating an action plan quickly, efficiently, and one that is nervous system approved, aligned with your most authentic self. That is available to you inside of our free community for cycle breakers on School. So definitely check the links out and grab access to that. It was actually not always free, but I want everyone to have access to it. So it's theirs, it's yours. Check it out. But let's jump into this video and we'll start by talking about what is holistic mental health. So, what do I mean when I say that? All right. And, so holistic mental health is an approach to our overall wellness that honors the mind, the body, our emotions, our spirit, our relationships, and our environment. So holistic mental health in general typically has the goal of allowing us to live a happy, healthy life and to pursue that. And what's different about holistic mental health is that we are not just considering the mental or emotional, the cognitive layer. We are considering all of it. Now, as a mental health therapist, of course, I'm up to the times in that regard. And, more and more therapists are talking about bringing the body into the therapy space. And I think that's powerful and very important. And so you may even think, oh, well, I take a holistic mental health approach. I'm a somatic therapist, or I'm a somatic, practitioner, or my therapist does this, or in my work, I consider my body. And that is a great step towards holistic. But holistic actually considers not just one or two or even three layers, but 5 layers of the self. So if you're listening to me and you're like, five, how many layers do I have? You're not alone in that. And that is why I love to talk about this. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. What are the 5 layers and how do they show up in your system? But holistic mental health considers the 5 layers of self. Holistic mental health also recognizes things like our lived experience, the story that we've been telling ourselves about who we are, who other people are, how the world works, the trauma that lives in our system, our cultural experiences and values, the experiences of our friends, our families, our ancestors as well, the identities that we hold and value, our specific nervous system responses are all a part of holistic mental health. And also the systems that we interact with are a part of that. And Another differentiation for holistic mental health is the way that we understand symptoms. So, symptoms are not failure, symptoms are not necessarily just things to be treated, right, with behavioral or cognitive interventions. They are signals. They're signals of a deeper story, of a deeper experience that you're having. And our goal is to be in relationship with the totality of who we are and then determine from that place what is the best way to support us with getting our needs met. And so, holistic mental health really emphasizes regulation over repression. So, it's not about just what shows up at the top of the iceberg, what is above the surface. And as long as you look good on paper, as long as you got the degree, you got the job, you got the partner, right? You have the children in private school, as long as on paper things look good, then we don't need to worry about the rest. That's not what holistic mental health is all about. We care about what's at the top of the iceberg as well as what's underneath. Holistic mental health emphasizes capacity over comparison. And so, what I mean by that is rather than, well, the expectation is that I'm showing up at this level, it's attuning into my system and determining what do I actually have capacity for, regardless of what I'm supposed to be able to take on at a particular time. And holistic mental health also emphasizes sustainability versus intensity. What do I mean by that? So, we want to focus on what is it that I can implement in my life that I can sustain versus what is it that I implement in my life, go, 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 and then burnout, right? So, many, especially I work with a lot of helping professionals, a lot of folks who know what it's like to need help themselves and are from that place are now serving as nurses, as therapists, in many different capacities, as business owners, doctors, lawyers, and more. And something about that can really lend itself to this cycle of burnout, fall apart, and then pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do it all over again. Holistic mental health instead emphasizes how can I experience balance in my life rather than these highs and lows, right? And ultimately, this all sort of wraps up into holistic mental health values both and versus either or. So it's not either you're a success or you're a failure, either you are rising or you're falling. It is, I am a human, and just as our breath rises and falls, so does my capacity, so does the way that I show up, so do my rhythms around leadership, around loving, around relationships, around the way that my relationship with myself and my dream. So is there a natural rising and contraction. My goal is not to always be on the inhale. My goal is to honor the value of the exhale. And that's why I love talking about the breath. The breath is one of the holistic mental health practices that we'll talk about. But that's kind of a bit of a preview there for you. All right. And so, how is it different from the traditional model? I've shared a bit about this, but one of the things that can happen, one, in the traditional model, there tends to be a hierarchy, right? For example, with mental health, we are valuing the mental and emotional layer of who we are, sometimes over the body based layer, over the energetic level layer, over the spiritual layer, as opposed to understanding all of these layers as equally valid and more of a relationship and a balance that we can live within. There's also hierarchy as it relates to what uh, traditional mental health care looks like. Now, listen, I'm a therapist. My bread and butter is therapy. I love therapy. I encourage therapy, right? However, there is this way in which, and of course, It has a lot to do with the way that psychotherapy, as a field and a profession, has grown and expanded, can create this top-down approach where the therapist is the knower, the wise one, and the client is the one to be fixed. Even if we're not giving direct advice, there's still some inherent power dynamic showing up, as opposed to a model of even in group therapy, right? Uh, there's still an element of this is the therapist here guiding the group. And that is in contrast to a holistic model that might value a holistic circle, or may you may still have a guide. We still need guides, we still need space holders, but there is a difference when you take a holistic mental health approach. All right. And so, oftentimes, another thing is that traditional models can really emphasize fixing the behavior without necessarily addressing root causes. And so, that often shows up, and it's not all, a therapist's fault, for instance, or even our own fault when we think about, hey, I just want to get to the outcome and get to the goal. It's not bad to have clarity around the goal, it's when we are folks so focused on the goal that we're not necessarily thinking about the repercussions, what gets lost, what gets transformed in maybe ways that are not alignment for us when we go through that process. And another difference is this idea of productivity as wellness. If you are getting up, right, and you are moving around and you're able to go to work every day and take care of the kids and, pay the bills, that means you're good. Whereas with a holistic approach, it's really about alignment and rhythm. If you're getting up and doing those responsibilities and even doing well, but inside you are deeply suffering, that is not what we would consider holistic mental health. And we would encourage things like rest, things like doing less, right, as the actual medicine, being less productive, less performative. Just because you can doesn't mean you should in a holistic mental health model, right? And so the reframe there is that you're not being unmotivated, you're not being inefficient, you are responding to your natural rhythm of life. I'm sure some trees, if they really wanted to, they could keep those leaves, right? But they honor the benefit of the winter and they allow their leaves to release because it is a part of how we build harmony in our system. All right. Now, why is this critical for cycle breakers in particular? I have so many calls coming in. Why is this critical for cycle breakers in particular? It is really important for cycle breakers because cycle breakers are often sometimes the first in their families to accomplish something or to avoid things. Cycle breakers are often healing while they're also building and doing something new. They're often reparenting themselves while also leading. And they're also kind of learning rest and joy and play and creativity and all of these things while actively unlearning survival mode. So they've done something powerful by doing something different, but oftentimes the new framework, the new model of who they are is not fully built yet. All right. And so for a cycle breaker, the traditional goal setting model can actually reinforce cycle breaking habits, but this is something I talk about all the time. Listen, the old cycle, it gets exhausting, constantly running away from the trauma, the anxiety, the isolation, the overwhelm. And what we need instead as cycle breakers is often to ground in and embody that cycle maker energy, where healing, resiliency, and growth comes from a place of stability, comes from a more grounded place. And so the traditional goals will really set cycle breakers up for things like repeating cycles of burnout, shame, fear, and protective behaviors that, again, on the outside look good, look like success, but on the inside is not the case because we are making choices in our lives, making changes in our life based off of fear and suffering and pain, as opposed to what we might prefer based on clarity, all right, and alignment. So, that, what happens there is then that kind of reinforces the grief, the fatigue, and placing healing on a timeline that cycle breakers, can really, that we can work with. Like, we can work within that system, but it doesn't often bring the joy, the peace, the things that we've been craving all this time. All right. And so, the other thing, I haven't spoken too much about practices. I mentioned breath work. I mentioned breath work to you, but having holistic practices that give you a whole toolkit across all 5 layers of yourself, that support your capacity, that honor the different seasons that we may go through and the different nervous system states that we may experience, that can be very beneficial for cycle breakers who are really learning a new path. It also really creates a path where you can still accomplish your goals without self-abandonment, which sometimes cycle breakers have to unlearn, because self-abandonment was often part of the journey in getting to where they are. Right. And then building trust with yourself over time. Holistic mental health gives you more tools and really encourages leaning into your own intuition, which requires a lot of self trust. And so the holistic mental health approach really just is a good fit for cycle breakers. All right. So, I've talked about what holistic mental health is, how it's different from a traditional model, and why it's important for cycle breakers. But I want to ground this in with some specific examples and what it might look like for someone who is a cycle breaker. Maybe you're in that place where, you have broken some cycles in your life. Like, maybe you're the first, to you know, get that advanced degree, have a stable career and family, right? And so you are doing well on paper, but internally you're just not feeling very good for yourself. You value a new way, a more holistic way, but you don't even know how. So you might be in therapy, you're journaling, you might even have some meditation practices under your belt, right? And you're setting some goals for yourself. You are very much that high functioning person. But on the inside, what do you actually feel? Constant fatigue and exhaustion, feeling disconnected from a true sense of joy. You might be feeling kind of irritable, on edge, or emotionally flat. You find yourself coming home, right? You are your best self out in these streets at work and whatnot, but you come home and everything kind of just falls apart. You're numbing out on the couch or scrolling TikTok, IG, and all of those. All right. And so when that happens, we might begin to feel ashamed that, our healing isn't really working, or maybe this is the best that it can get, or that you're missing something, you're doing it wrong. And, you know, a traditional approach to that might say, okay, let's look at your time management skills. Okay, let's add, maybe you need to go ahead and rest more, improve your sleep, time hack your sleep, or if whatever, that productivity hack your sleep, right? It might say, oh, let's add another coping skill to your toolbox. And what this does, right? Those things don't sound bad, right? Those are not bad strategies. But what these strategies do is center your behaviors, the behaviors and the cognitions only. What is missing is the middle. It's missing, to some extent, it may acknowledge some emotions. Oh, you're sad, or you're frustrated, right? But it's missing the body, and it's also missing the spirit of what you're communicating and how this experience you're having fits in with the bigger picture in the context of your life's purpose, but also in the context of your family, your culture, and the system that we're living in, right? Let's see how that gets addressed in a holistic mental health approach. With a holistic mental health approach, we acknowledge and utilize the 5 layers of self to uncover what's actually happening in your life. So we might explore the mental layer that holds beliefs, and those beliefs might say, if I slow down, everything will fall apart. And there we're beginning to name and make space for some of the internalized pressures that can kind of lead to outperforming survival. And what I mean by that is we're running away from the survival. If I can just get it right, then I can earn the peace that I've been looking for. We tap into the emotional layer where we acknowledge maybe some suppressed grief from years of having to be the strong one. And so there's a part that of you that wants to overperform and keep going and earn it. There's another part that's actually sad or grieving that you've had to be the strong one and hold it together. And that there's anger coming alongside that grief that maybe has not been safe to express. All of that is draining your energy. So when we look at the energetic level, what we see is a nervous system that goes into hypervigilance mode, fight or flight in the workplace. That's driving up your cortisol levels, speeding up your heart rate in your lungs, and sending messages to the system. We are not safe and we have to perform in order to be safe. And then when we get home, we understand an understandable crash. As that cortisol cannot continue to sustain itself, we begin to slow down and we actually drop down into a shutdown mode, which is really where we wanted to be at all times. Um, and so we have now with the energetic layer, nervous system language, and also the qualitative understanding of what it feels like to be running a race and then experiencing utter exhaustion by the end of it, and the loneliness that comes from no one knowing. So we also tap into that physical layer, as I'm mentioning, the nervous system, the body sensations that are coming all along that. And then it makes sense that taking more naps, right, resting more, getting more sleep is not restoring that, because it's not the lack of sleep at night per se that's causing the issue. It's that your nervous system is going into overdrive when you are in certain situations. And so we need to address that. And then the relational layer is also showing up here. So overgiving in relationships may be showing up, lack of reciprocal support showing up at work, at home, and other spaces. And then the spiritual layer, right? Maybe you recognize that you're feeling disconnected from your meaning at work. The work that you're doing is not as aligned as it once used to be. Or spirit is calling you in a different direction. And that is also a part of what is draining, because there was a time in which doing all the things that you were doing were energizing, were fine. And now it's not working. Maybe you're being called into something else. And how can we intuitively take a look at all of that, sense into how that is showing up in our system? You see me moving here because it's really about like finding the flow of all of this. How does this integrate in your system? And then can we begin to sense into what some of the solutions are? All right. And so I want to say this. This is my observation. Again, with cycle breakers, I talk a lot about the everyday experience about the cycle breaker, not necessarily the cycles, the specific cycles, but yeah, I kind of leave a lot of that conversation for inside of the therapy room, where we're talking about those specific intergenerational traumas and healing those, right? But I do notice that the more generational weight that you're carrying, the more stuff that you're carrying, that probably didn't even start with you and isn't even really about you, but it's living in your nervous system, it's living in your body. It might not even be living in your mind, and that you may not have conscious awareness of it, but the way that you show up is signaling that. The more generational weight that you're carrying, the more holistic your plan needs to be. You need these types of tools to effectively sort of release these from your system and then maintain a holistic wellness for yourself. All right. So now we've talked about the holistic mental health and what it's about, how it's different from a traditional model, why it's important for cycle breakers, and it even got into a specific example to kind of break through how it is different for a cycle breaker and how that shifts in your life. Now let's get to the good part, which is all about creating a holistic mental health action plan. I want to talk to you about what that actually looks like. This is based off of several years working individually and groups with cycle breakers like you, with helping professionals, with wounded healers, with business owners, with parents, right, who are really, really, really trying to strike this balance between doing what it takes to help things go better for the next generation, for their children, for their clients, right? While also honoring the needs of their own mind, body, and soul. And through trial and error, through research, through feedback of working with these individuals, I've created a holistic mental health action plan. And I've identified some key things that really need to be in this plan that really support the ability to go from what I call head to heart to action. And that's really important because with a holistic mental health approach, it's important that our actions are actually aligned. And when our actions are aligned, it makes it more sustainable. We're able to start that goal, we're able to sustain that goal, and we have plans in place to support us when life begins to shift, because that's what it does, as well as plans in place to support us as we identify natural expansion and contraction in our system. All right. So let's jump in. What is the process to creating a holistic mental health action plan? It actually begins before the plan. And so, if you don't know, within our Cycle Breaker community, I actually have a 4-part method to helping you transform and step into and embody a life of open hearted living, loving, and leading. And it's our 4-part Cycle Breaker to Cycle Maker method. It includes building a plan, having the power so you're fueled for your success, having a process that allows you to level up from where you've been and where you want to go, and then having the practices that support that. So with that, the first stage, right, the end result of that first stage plan is a holistic mental health action plan. But we don't actually start with the plan. There's some things that we need to do beforehand. So I want to take you through those things. The first step that we want to do is set powerful intention setting that activates your system and begins to prime it for the life that you want for yourself. All right. And so you do that by asking questions like, what do I want more of in my life? What does my level 10 life look like? So 10 out of 10 life look like, and getting so clear on it. What does that look like in my finances, at work, at home, in my hobbies, with my body, in my movement? What does it look like in my physical environment? What does it look like in relationship to my ancestors, to my culture, to spiritual? What does it all look like, right? And getting super, super clear on that, and asking yourself, why is it important for you? So really getting access to what is that why that energizes you around that. Key here is you can feel it in your body. There's an energetic connection to that intention that you want for yourself. It's almost like a tether. You are tethering yourself to your goal. All right. And so the key here is that we want to focus in on the felt sense of it, not just this is the outcome, this is the outcome, this is the outcome. Because in reality, we don't really know at this stage, at the very beginning, what the actual outcomes need to be for us to be aligned. And I say this is probably a whole other video. But with cycle breakers, especially, I find that they oftentimes follow the script that they were given for life, and they get the education, they get the job, they do the marriage thing, right? And on paper, it looks good, but they feel bamboozled. And it's because the focus was on the outcome and not on the felt sense. So when the felt sense started to feel off and things weren't in alignment, that part was repressed in service of the outcome. What we want to do here is the opposite. We turn that upside down, and we identify an outcome, but the outcome is just to kind of give us a bit of a tether for what we think might be out there. But really, the felt sense is what is going to drive our process moving forward. All right. So once we have set a powerful intention that we can feel in our system, and we can activate that, not just at the moment of intention setting, but we can activate that regularly throughout our process, then we are ready to move into our holistic wellness audit. So now, with the end goal in mind, we can begin to assess ourselves and the difference between where it is that we want to go and where we currently are at. Now, in the therapy room, we're trained to provide whole audits, right? By we send screening tools for depression, for anxiety, for trauma, for burnout, for work, all these things. And those are good tools, absolutely, especially if your focus is on diagnosing mental health disorders. And that may be an important part of your journey in this season. And if it is, I encourage you to connect with a licensed therapist who can support you in your area. If you want to work with our team, we provide insurance approved therapy throughout the state of Florida, right? Virtually and in person in Palm Beach County. We'd love to work with you and support you in that regard. But this is not necessarily about a illness model or a diagnosis model. This is about your holistic wellness. So it's not about anxiety per se. It's about, I want to feel alive and ability and the ability to live in the present moment and to experience joy and creativity and put myself out there. Anxiety might get in the way of that. We want to treat that. But what we are focusing in on here is where it is that we want to go. So we're taking a look at that. And so I found that there are a few things that are helpful to audit ourselves on that are not about diagnosis. Okay. And the first one is exploring how we're showing up. How close are we to our level 10 out of 10 life in 8 dimensions of wellness? And the 8 dimensions of wellness that I speak about are similar to maybe what others talk about, but mine is a little bit different because we're really taking this holistic approach seriously. And so we know that it's not just your story that matters. It's also the story of your family, the story of your ancestors, the story of your culture that matters. It's also the spiritual context in which you've grown up into. And so there's some shifts, and also that your healing impacts you and is for you, but it is also for others. And so we also need to be able to assess what is my capacity, not just to heal for myself, but to help pass along that healing and support others and activate others in experiencing that level of healing as well. And so that is also a part of the dimensions that we provide. Again, that's available to you in our a free community if you want to grab that. The other, which I've spoken about a few times at this point now, but is the layers of self. So we have these 5 layers: the physical, energetic, mental, and emotional, which kind of live together, right? That cognitive space, the intuitive or wisdom layer, and then the spiritual layer, which is anything that connects us to beyond ourselves. So that can include a relationship with God or a higher power. It also includes your relationship with nature, and it also includes the relational space, the neural Wi-Fi, the communal aspect of who we are. Some folks like to separate that out, but I find that when we say connecting to something bigger than ourselves is absolutely a spiritual connection when we're able to have an authentic connection with another soul, right? So, so those are things. Additional things, as I said, we have internal processes within our community for assessing your intergenerational where you are in the cycle breaker to cycle maker journey. In fact, I have a free quiz if you want to grab access to that to figure out what specific stage of the cycle breaker to cycle maker journey you're at. And then also on a spectrum from burnout to collective liberation, right? Where are you? And how can you assess that? Because that is also important. So we assess that as well. And with each of these tools for auditing, you assess where you're at. And then we also go qualitative with it. We identify what's draining, you know, what is feel supportive and what is missing in your system so that you can identify what are the specific needs that I have. And so going through that process, identifying what are those specific needs helps you. The next part of the process, once you are clear on what your specific needs are, you are ready to move into actually creating your holistic mental health action plan. And as I mentioned, our 4-part method: the plan, the power, the process, and the practices. You want to be prepared for that. One of the things that, that can happen when you're action planning is you create a plan that makes space for who you are today and not who you are becoming. And so when you create a plan using our method, you actually create a plan that makes space for who you're becoming. So by the time you do that level up, you still have the habits, the routines, the practice, the things that you need in place to sustain that. And you have the clarity as well. So let's briefly talk about what is included there. So, when you go in to create your holistic mental health action plan, the first thing I'm going to invite you to do is identify what are your goals. Now, uh, I think a lot of people are talking about, I'm on a healing journey, right? We always talk about healing, and that is one goal. And I think that is one thing that the traditional mental health model has really emphasized is this idea of healing. But listen, especially as you go further and further along your cycle breaker to cycle maker journey, guess what? Healing is just not, that's not the end all be all. We heal for a purpose so that we can live out our life's purpose, so that we can experience joy, peace, creativity, and all the yummy things that this life has to offer. So we can connect with the people around us and share that and also receive from them so that we can resource, expand in beautiful ways. And there's also something to not having to try so hard. And so maybe the goal that we may have is I want to rest more, I want to play more, I want to maintain, right? So, identifying what goal that you have for yourself. What category is it? Healing and release? Is it rest and maintenance? Is it resourcing and expansion? Is it community care? Identifying that goal, and what are the minimum viable habits that you need to put in place immediately that make space. Like, if I were to do this one thing, make space for this one thing, then I would have time to make progress towards whatever the specifics of my goals are. All right. Once we have that, we have the basics. And I love to also have an affirmation statement. What's one thing that I can affirm about my ability to do that one thing, my ability to do that habit? Once we have that, we move into the next stage, which is the power piece, right? This is still your plan, but we want to get more depth around what is it that we are actually going to do over the course of this period of time to build that up. And by the way, one of the things we also do is determine how long is this plan supporting you for? Is this your plan for the year? Is this plan for your life? Is this a plan for a quarter, a week, a month? What is it? I have found that the quarterly 90-day plan is a good sweet spot. It gives you enough time to work on things, see progress, adjust and modify a couple of times. It also models, right, the change of the seasons, right? So if we have 4 seasons throughout a year, approximately, depending on where you live, right, that may also be a somewhat good model for us to use as humans because we're all connected. All right. So you have what the type of goal, you have your time frame, you also have the what's the minimum habit and an affirmation that you can use specifically for that habit. Now with the power phase, we are doing some planning here, and this is where we're deciding what things am I going to do to make sure I have fuel in my system to accomplish my goals. What one, two, or three things might I need to do? For some people that's affirmations. For other people it's like, listen, I need to be in therapy and clear out the shame, figure out the guilt that's draining me. I really need to make burnout recovery a priority for me because I see it's draining my energy, or something else. Now, within our community, within that template, there are actually several items listed for you, as well as guidance on how to actually take action on those things to support you with making sure you have what you need to fuel up for your system. The benefit there is what you need in one season might not be what you need in another season. So by having that full checklist, it really gives you the clarity and the flexibility that you need to support whatever it is your system needs specifically. Okay. Um, and so, by the way, this is also where one on one, I haven't mentioned this, but in our Cycle Maker intensives, we work one on one specifically on the power phase to do a beliefs audit where we're looking at every single negative belief that you have about yourself, every single positive belief that you have about yourself. And with the goal of imagine those negative things you believe about yourself no longer feeling true. The positive things that you feel about yourself feeling 100% true, what would that do for your capacity, for the energy in your system to accomplish your dreams and your goals? That's what we do when we use powerful modalities like EMDR, brain spotting to support you with that, which is so cool and one of my favorite ways to work. Now, even if your goal is not all about healing, you may still need to address some of the beliefs that may get in the way of you taking action on what your goal actually is. And that's what that phase is all about. From there, but you can also do things like affirmations, and there's also guidance on how to use affirmations to also fuel your system, breath work to fuel your system. And so you see where having those holistic practices in play can be really supportive. The next one is the processes, and this is where we level up from where we're starting to where we want to go. So this is your level up phase. And for some people, this is more journaling, right? And reflection. For some people, this is more action oriented. For some people, this is the core of therapy work that they're doing. Within our collective, we have a few different things. We have coaching calls, we have holistic workshops, and we also have, what else do we have? There's something else. Oh, that's another thing. I'll talk about that. Yeah, so we have this piece that really, really, really supports you with doing that level up. One of my favorite ways to move through the process phase is through our intensives, and that's because we're using brain spotting, EMDR, holistic practices to help you embody, visualize, right, that level 10 stuff, but energetically connect to that. Allow your nervous system to fully connect to that so that you are now energetically, emotionally aligned, and even body posture aligned to where it is that you want to go. And from there, then the practices phase is really where we go into integration support, where you are able to try this out in your real life, see what changes are showing up for you, track those changes that are showing up for you, apply those changes to other areas of your life. And so, what does that look like? I almost forgot to talk about, okay, so within your plan, what does that look like for process? I use that head, heart, action framework. So, you actually have a list of the specific practices that you can do for cognitive processing, right? To help you get out of your head or clarify what's going on in your head, processes to help you live in the heart space. How do you do that work? Like I said, is it therapy? Is it breath work? Is it journaling? Whatever that is, to really be with what's in your body, what's in your emotions, to energetically connect to who you are becoming. And then action. So, what are the action oriented things? And that might be clarity, a strategic action, right? Strategic actions that you plan to take. It may be creating a manifesto for yourself in boundary setting, for example. It may just be making a list of the specific tasks that you will engage in that support your level up in this season. And then finally, the practices. So, what does that look like? Again, that's integrating, seeing it in your real life. Step one. Step two, applying it to different domains of wellness. Then also taking a look at energetically what are the layers that of self that you are engaging with, and is there any space to add specific tools to your toolkits to either build on strengths that you already have or to expand your capacity with those practices. And then can you begin to create rhythms for yourself, practices that are more not just something you do here and there, but becomes a daily routine, a monthly routine, a seasonal routine for yourself, including making time for rest, making time for leadership as well. And then finally stepping into leadership with that. How do you pass that on? What is your best way of passing that on to the next generation? And so all of that is included in the plan that you have available in the school community. There's a checklist for each of the goals. So for the healing goals, the maintenance goals, resourcing goals, community care goals, there's like 10 to 12 different specific things that you practices that you can engage in that may support you on this level. I actually have an expanded list of practices that when you're ready to really zoom into, oh, these layers of self that I have, right? I want to, I know that I can say myself on the mental and emotional, but I want to practice sustaining myself using more intuitive ways of being, or more body based ways of being, or more spiritual tools, or physical, mental, emotion is not available to me. How can I draw on something else? There's also an expansion available to you there. But now here you have it. That's your full holistic mental health action plan. You identify your goal, your timeline, and what is the core activity that you will engage in that will make space for making sure that this happens in your life. What are the affirmations that you want to affirm for yourself in the power phase, identifying what are the things that are going to fuel your system. So when there are days when you're running low on energy, you know exactly what you can do to fuel up, right? Or you fuel up at the top so you have something to sustain you. The processes phase, where you actually engage in that level up, and that can be a daily practice, it can be a specific season of time where you really slow down and make it happen. All right. And then the practices, and this is where you integrate, you're adding tools to your toolkit, you're actually doing the work and responding in real time with feedback on how that is going. All right. So, y'all, I hope that this was supportive to you today as we talked about creating a plan for a holistic mental health plan to help you accomplish your goals this year. Right. And by the way, this is going to be supportive to you, whether you're thinking about it at the top of the year, whether you're thinking about it, in the middle of the year as a reset, refocus, or otherwise. Some brief things. This video is way longer than I planned it to be. So maybe I need to do a part two. But where do you go from here once you actually have the plan? I like to again confirm that focus, 90-day focus is my favorite, but it can be whatever you want it to be. And then how are you going to engage in ways that make that shift your life around so that you can accommodate this plan. And so if you actually want a 5-day reset and refocus plan, it's a 5-day mini challenges for you to go in. You create your plan in one day each. It's 10 to 15 minutes each day. You do those things to make sure that your life is organized. You have the people in place, right? You have the childcare in place. You have the calendar is created, all of those things to actually get it done. But if you give yourself an hour, you could actually do it all at once, right? So that is the plan. From there, I encourage having your 90-day focus, but then also monthly heart-centered reflection time to really sit in with what's working, what's not working, what needs to shift. And you're doing that in a heart-centered, intuitive way as opposed to just a cognitive way. Now, you can bring the cognitive inputs, right? Especially if you've been tracking things, but we intentionally connect to our intuition to get these answers. And that's something inside of our community. We actually offer monthly intention setting circles to support you with that. On a weekly basis, I encourage just weekly check-ins, a capacity check. How is your nervous system doing? Is there anything that you want to shift or change for yourself on a short-term basis? Is there any additional support that you might need, right? And so we're just reviewing it without shame. Okay. And then on a daily basis, just doing some tracking, checking off, hey, are you committed to whatever habit, whatever routine you've identified for yourself? Just noticing those patterns again without judgment. We're putting it down. And then on a weekly basis, you get to kind of look at, hey, are there any trends? Is there anything that I want to quickly adjust? So here you have it. That's the full plan and even an implementation process. And then at the end of 90 days, I host a quarterly retreat to support you with releasing and resetting and refocusing. In fact, we have our next one coming up. It's the top of the year, so it's a really special one. It is our release and reset, making space for holistic wellness in 2026 and beyond. And I invite you to join us. For members, folks who are in our Cycle Maker Collective, that's the paid level of our community, it's actually available to you absolutely free. Otherwise, the price point is $27. And so for just 27 hours, you get a 5-hour retreat where we walk through this full action planning process, and we will create your holistic mental health action plan together, as well as the implementation support. But what I do want to tell you is that we do a little bit more, because sometimes what happens is we struggle to actually create and implement a plan because we're still dragging with us all the stuff from the past. So we do a release experience to support you with releasing some of it. Realistically, right, you may not get to all of it. And so once we do a release, we connect with what's still present, what's most important. You put that on your plan, and then guess what? You have a full, you have the rest of the month to support you, or the rest of your quarter to support you with doing that. All right. So that is all for now. Please do be sure to share with me your feedback. What are you really excited about doing? What are some of the goals that you want to accomplish for yourself? Sharing that in the chat, or even better, go to our community on School, join the free community, and inside our Cycle Breaker to Cycle Maker starter kit, you will have access to creating your very own holistic mental health action plan. All right, y'all. This has been beautiful. I can't wait to continue supporting you as you create plans, and not just that, but you take heart aligned action using a holistic mental health approach to your wellness. Until next time, keep going. Your healing is in sight.